Greetings, people. Welcome again to our ongoing analysis of capitalism versus socialism. And today what we're going to talk about is some of the reasons why socialism will make you poorer than capitalism will. And we'll also end up covering other topics that are related to this as well. But I think most people would not be happy about socialism if they knew it was going to make them poorer in general. Now, some people have embraced a philosophy of altruism, and a lot of people don't really understand exactly what altruism really is. Altruism is not, as we've been led to believe, is not when you sacrifice. It's not really a sacrifice, true altruism, because what altruism really is supposed to mean is that it's when you sacrifice a lesser value for something that's more important. So how can it be bad for you to release something that's not as valuable as something that's more valuable? It's really more of a choice. So all that to say that in this article I found on the federalistpapers.org, an article, I think they took this article from a website called Town Hall, and they have a little box right here, or grid, showing you exactly the difference between capitalism versus socialism. Not really for dummies, not calling anybody dumb, but it's just something for people that may not be well versed in economics or in political systems, or people that haven't had the time or taken the time to actually study these topics in depth. So we have the little grid here. We have what socialists think it means, and what then under it, what it really means. And they're going to talk about the terms capitalism and socialism. So the term capitalism and what socialists think it means is that it's a system of greed and selfishness where people do nothing except try to rip off other people, and that the only motivating factor to do anything is money. And that's what socialists would try to have you believe capitalism is. Now, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that there aren't some people or some businesses or some corporations that operate based on greed or money, profits at the expense of everything else. But by the same token, that's not, it's an individual thing, A. And B, is just because you change the system or the way the political system operates does not mean that you still won't have people operating based on that same greed and selfishness in a socialistic system. It's just like anything else. You're going to have a different range of people in the way that they think. Just because you change the political or economic system is not going to change human nature. It's not going to convert people that think in terms of greed into people that all of a sudden become little saints or angels or something like that, or we're going to be motivated by something other than what they just are motivated by. So that's kind of a misnomer, I guess. You can see the fallacy in this description. Because just because you change the economic system is not gonna change how people think or the nature of people. Certain people, that's just how they see the world. And you can put them in any kind of system, and they're going to figure out a way to get what they want. And moving on to how socialists think, or what they think socialism means. And it says here they think that socialism is a system where everyone is completely selfless and will labor voluntarily for the common good, and that the only motivating factor to do anything is because it might help someone else, or that like a bunch of people in the socialistic system, or all people in the socialism, are going to not worry about themselves as much as helping out society. Which I think we can see the fallacy in that as well, because regardless of what type of economic system you're in, nobody's going to clothe you and feed you and be concerned about your general welfare as you are. I don't care what kind of system you're talking about. Even in socialism, where you have the state and the bureaucrats and all these different people supposed to be looking out for you, the bottom line is, how would they even know what's best for you in the first place, or what you think is best for you? Only you would know what's best for you, because you're the only person that knows what you want to do. So if you think about it, it's pretty presumptuous for the government to actually believe that they know better what's better for you, or what's best for you, or best for anybody, or best for everybody, than the people themselves. As a matter of fact, it's kind of, if you think about it, it's kind of creepy. How do you react to people when they try to come to you and tell you how you should be living your life? Most people don't like that, because first of all, even if you're close to somebody, you don't know everything about them. You simply don't. And it's kind of insulting for friends and family to try to tell you how to run your life based on what they think about it instead of what you think about it. So, moving through this grid, we get to the part where it tells you what the terms actually mean. And for capitalism, they say that capitalism is a system where people keep what they earn and trade voluntarily for what they need, and that individuals are left to pursue their own agendas so long as they don't directly harm others. And that's what capitalism, I guess it was designed to do, or designed to be. But in my opinion, and from what I've observed, is that it doesn't really matter what type of government system you have. What I've noticed over the years is that even in America, or I guess this would apply to any government, is that when I was a lot younger, there seemed to be less regulation and more freedom. But what I noticed about how the government tends to operate, and government bureaucrats, I guess, in particular, because a government is just like a corporation. That they're both just abstractions. They don't exist except in our minds, or like a corporation or even a government. They only exist on a piece of paper, and they only get animated as concepts when we all accept the concept. Because a government or a corporation, they only exist on paper. What it really is you have what they call agents. You have corporate agents or employees for the corporation, and then in a government you have bureaucrats, or you have government agents, because they're supposed to be operating in the capacity for the so-called government, but really it's just a bunch of people that get together and do stuff. Whether it's a corporation, whether it's a gang, whether it's a government, whether it's a club, whatever kind of organization you want to talk about, they're always composed of people, individuals. And so, even though capitalism is the ideal, what I've noticed over the years is that these government bureaucrats, these people, they always, it's like they always want to grow or increase their influence over the people in society over time. So, and it's like an incessant march. It's a never-ending thing. It's, from what I can see, it's just a property, or it's a characteristic of people and organizations. They're always seeking to grow their influence, to grow their budgets, to grow their control over people in the society. And that's what I've seen in America over, it used to be you didn't have nearly as many requirements, regulations, laws, rules, and short, just government control. It's just increased many times what it was years ago, 10, 20, 30 years, 40, really 40 years ago. Or I guess the longer the period of time, if you compare the government control and their role in our lives, it has multiplied over the years. If you look back in 1950, 1970, even 1990, and then you look at how things operate today, there's much more government control. And this is talking about a relatively free enterprise society, or relatively capitalist society such as the United States. So imagine what would happen in a socialist society. But moving right along back to the graph, we can talk about what the term socialism really means and how it's defined. And in the grid it says that socialism is a system where all property is controlled by a small group of individuals, and that these individuals determine what the common good will be and force everyone else to comply. Now, we spoke a little bit about that in the last episode, or last part of our ongoing analysis of socialism. And if you look at what happens, that's basically what happens, because in socialism or socialist society, because somebody has to set the standards. If the government is the one in control of everything, then the people in the government are going to be making the sweeping decisions for the vast majority of people in the society. And it's not going to be everybody making these decisions. That's just physically and technically impossible for you to vote on everything. And even if you say you do put everything up for vote, then what ends up happening is that it becomes a tyranny of the majority. Because now if you have 51% of people vote for something, now they're going to enforce whatever the vote was on the minority of people. So that 51% of people or more, however many people it is, but the bare minimum, if it's going to be a vote, is 51%. So they would be able to force the 49% or whatever fraction it is of people to do something they don't want to do. So, which is something else that you should think about, or something else that we don't hear these socialist people really bringing up when they speak about how good socialism is. Whereas in a republic, well, ideally in a republic, there are certain rights and certain things that people, you can't vote away. You can't vote people's rights away, or you shouldn't be able to vote people's rights away, because we know that does end up happening from time to time. But in a perfect society or a perfect republic, it's not supposed to be that way. If you have a right, it doesn't matter if other people feel that you shouldn't have it, or that you should submit to their wishes. So that's something else to consider. So I guess that's just like a framework, kind of a base for us to try to have an understanding of some of the terms of what we're going to talk about a little bit later. And when we start getting down to covering the 7 reasons that socialism will make you poorer than capitalism. And that's not even talking about whether or not socialism will make you freer than capitalism or capitalist society. So let's start with point number 1. Point number 1 is that socialism benefits the few at the expense of the many. And we kind of just breached that a little bit already in just talking about the definitions of the terms. Now, what he does say is that one way in which socialism is better than capitalism is that it offers more security. It's like it kind of works like an expensive insurance policy that dramatically cuts into your quality of life, but ensures that if worse comes to worse, you have a floor that you can't drop below. But the problem is that it's so expensive. It costs so much for you to have such a big government apparatus to take care of everybody in the society, for the government to try to take on the awesome responsibility of taking care of the needs of everybody in the society. I mean, that's a pretty big ask if you ask me. And if you think about it, I mean, the United States has over 330 million people, and you expect the government, some government bureaucrats, to be able to efficiently and effectively take care of all these people from cradle to grave. That seems to be a bit much. But what he says here is that for the vast majority, that will work out to be kind of a terrible deal for you to base your whole life on just the worst it can possibly get. But he says, on the other hand, that if you're lazy, if you're totally incompetent, or you just have a real bad streak, a long streak of bad luck, that these meager benefits provided by socialism may be very appealing. But most people, they can do better for themselves than the government can do if given a chance. Unfortunately, what happens to a lot of people is they get into a habit of being dependent on the government. And it tends to breed laziness. It tends to breed people thinking lowly of themselves and thinking that they actually need government help. It also kills their work ethic. It kills them being industrious. It kills their creativity. And I'm sure there's a lot of studies, and maybe in another episode I'll actually speak on that some more in more depth to show how government programs tend to breed dependency in people where they actually believe that they need government handouts or they need help from the government in order to make it, when it's just a belief, and it gets people to, I guess, shortchange themselves, as far as what they really can do and the amount of control they really have over their lives. And I guess that this one quote from Winston Churchill kind of sums it up, where he says, quote, "The inherent virtue of socialism is the equal sharing of miseries." Because there's no way the government, being dependent on government, is going to lead anyone to maximize or self-actualize their highest self or their best self. It just doesn't work that way. Usually people are spurred on to be creative based on problems. I guess you could say, well, maybe government handouts may be a problem that you have to overcome, but for most people, they just take the path of least resistance. So that's something to really consider. And moving right along, we'll move to point 2, where we learn that, or it states that capitalism encourages entrepreneurship while socialism discourages it. Now, what he says here is that a government in a capitalist economy can quite easily give everyone equality of opportunity with a few basic laws and regulations. But socialism strives to create equality of results, which sounds similar but is totally different. And moving along, we have a quote from Friedrich A. Hayek, who's the noted Austrian economist, and that this should frighten people who value their freedom, because Hayek said that a claim for equality of material position can only be met by a government with totalitarian powers. And that, and that's kind of scary, because if the government has the ability, capacity, or the legal requirement to provide you with everything, then that means they have to have total control over not just you, but over everyone in the society. And they go on to talk about how this has changed life in America. Because just like I was talking in the introduction, is that you can actually see this happening in America, as our efforts to reduce inequality have led to an ever-expanding government and a vast regulatory tangle that is almost unexplainable, despite the fact that it is certainly enforceable. So I guess this kind of explains my observation, is because these regulators and these bureaucrats and these people, because they're trying to get rid of inequality. Now, I'll be the first to tell you, there are some problems in society to a certain extent, but I mean, how much do you really think that legislation and bureaucrats can actually solve the problems in society? I mean, these people don't have magic wands to just right everything that's wrong in society. And I guess you'd have to believe that these bureaucrats have the ability to better forecast, to better regulate, and to have a better grasp on the changes that need to be made to society, more so than the people themselves, or more than the free market, or people being free in society, acting on their own best interest, or rational self-interest, as Ayn Rand calls it, rather than these bureaucrats. So, but in general, I mean, even if you don't know anything about socialism or capitalism, most people inherently know that in most cases, when the government comes in to solve a problem or to help, almost invariably the government makes it worse, or these government bureaucrats make the problem worse. They make it bigger. It turns into a big mess. So he finishes this point by going on to say that capitalism encourages people to start a business and build a better life for themselves, while socialism lays in wait with IRS agents, government bureaucrats, more and more red tape, and meddling bureaucrats looking for businesses and people to control and to loot. You can ask any business person, even business people and entrepreneurs in the United States. They have fear for all, the business cycle, all these kind of things, but most business people, by far, they fear the government and government bureaucrats the most, because those people can come into your business and for any reason or no reason or a trumped up reason, or it might be personal reason, or it could be corruption, it could be anything. And those government people, when they can come into your business and they can basically shut you down, they can confiscate your business, they can confiscate your home, your bank accounts, they can, and it doesn't have to even be legal. I mean, have you ever heard of civil asset forfeiture? That's something where they come in and take your stuff, they can take your property, even if you haven't committed a crime, under the pretext that they think or believe that your business or your assets or your money is related to a criminal enterprise, with no evidence, with no, nothing, but they just decree that, and then they come and just steal your stuff. It's so bad until the government ends up taking more people's property than the so-called thieves and burglars that actually do carry out crimes. I mean, it's that bad. But that's something we'll talk about later, because that's another whole different discussion. So point number 3 is that capitalism leads to innovation. The reason being is not, you have the motivation, as for profits. So you have to be very creative. And so what happens is that the bigger the risk, the more people that will take it. The risk reward paradigm. Usually the more risk you take on, you need more of a payoff to be willing to undergo that risk. So what happens in the bottom line is that capitalism offers very big rewards for productive people, or for enterprising people, or for people willing to take the risk and endure the tough work that it takes to be an entrepreneur. While socialism offers them only a parade of bureaucratic leeches who want to take advantage of the hard work these people put in, which doesn't make sense. For a person to go through the tough process of building value in a company like Entrepreneur does, it's all that hard work for some bureaucrat or the government to come in and take all the benefits of all your work. It's just not. It's not worth it. It's not going to happen. So point number 4 is that capitalism produces more economic growth in the economy than a socialist society ever could. And a lot of people, they believe that capitalism isn't working because even if you have poor people, which is kind of not, you're kind of missing the point on that. Because what happens is that the rich may take a larger share of the pie in capitalism, but that the poor also benefit tremendously from living in a growing, thriving economy. Because how he said, a rising tide lifts all the boats. And that you'll have so much more wealth in society by rewarding people for taking risks and for becoming entrepreneurs, until it's going to make life better for everybody, because you're going to have more value, much more value being produced in that society, because you have people that are being rewarded to be creative and to be productive. Whereby in a socialist country, you're not incentivized to work hard to be more and more productive. People are not rewarded for being creative. It's like everybody just gets the same amount of stuff. So there's no real incentive for you, for the most part, to stand out from the crowd or to work harder than everyone else. Point number 5. Socialism is too slow to adapt. And that that goes along with these bureaucrats. Now, in capitalism, the capitalism is extremely good at allocating capital to where it's most valued, or where where it has the most value. And it has to be, because if you don't do what you need to do efficiently, somebody else will. And people are not going to pay for things that don't work voluntarily. And if you look at socialism, it's slow to react, really slow and stupid. And one of the biggest problems is that government, when the government spends money, it's just spending other people's money. So they don't really require, it's not really required to be frugal with the money. Plus, people are not going to be frugal with somebody else, as frugal with somebody else's money as they are with their own money. Also, political concerns about appearances often trump the effectiveness of government programs. And the first thing I thought about with this is when I was watching the movie about Chernobyl, and how the government didn't want to admit that there was a design flaw in their nuclear reactor program, even though all the other nuclear reactors outside of Russia had a different design, because the people outside of Russia understood that there was an inherent flaw in the design of the reactors that they did. But because it became a government policy, and the government doesn't like to be wrong, or people in the government don't like to be wrong, the guy that ran that particular reactor that had the meltdown, they didn't want to just come out and say that it was the government's fault, because that's basically telling your boss he's wrong. And because everything was so hierarchical in the power structure, in the organizational structure of the control, till it was almost unheard of for people to actually just tell the truth and say, hey man, you messed up, the government was wrong. And if you haven't watched that movie, it was a mini series. I can't remember, it might have been 5, but it was really interesting. But I guess it was really interesting to me based on my experience when working in a plant, working in that kind of environment, and how different it is from when I watched what happened there versus what happened in my work experience. Because here in America, we have a focus on safety. I'm not saying it's perfect, but I guess over the years we've learned, and it's become very systematized, and you become very conscious of safety over whether or not somebody's wrong, to the point where if somebody tries to get you to do something that's personally harmful to you, then you can refuse to do that, refuse to go into a dangerous situation. I guess that's a little aside, but I'm gonna move on because we've been going kind of long here. Point number 6 is that socialism is inherently wasteful. And I guess this is best summed up by the great economist Milton Friedman when he says, quote, "Nobody spends somebody else's money as carefully as he spends his own." That's because you're going to look out for yourself. It's just human nature, like we discussed in earlier parts of this analysis. And like we talked, we know that government waste is legendary. And it says right here, if you didn't know, a poorly performing government program that wastes 100 times more money will probably receive a bigger budget the next year, because bureaucrats are trained and taught to always spend up all their money, whether they spend it efficiently or not. They're actually penalized for saving money because they shrink your budget. And I guess as another aside on that note, what I noticed, I found a video, it was a while back, this is kind of old, and this person was studying, they found out that the government could not account for $2 trillion, and I think it was in the defense budget. $2 trillion missing. Now this is a while back. This might have been around 2000. And so this professor, I think he was either a finance professor or a accounting professor at Michigan State University. He looked at that and he couldn't believe it. He said he was livid. He said there's no way the government could lose $2 trillion and not be able to account for $2 trillion in a budget. So he started to investigate. And I think he only investigated the Department of Defense, and it was one more department. I can't remember whether it was the Department of Housing, Department of Education. Anyway, he started to do some forensic accounting on these just two parts of the government, or two administrations of the government, or the defense and this other one. And not only did he find $2 trillion not unaccounted for, as he started to dig into the finance and the forensic accounting, he found not 2, not 5, he found $20 trillion unaccounted for. And that's not even all of the government. That's just $20 trillion. $20 trillion missing. Wrap your mind around that and imagine what's going to happen if you let the government run health care for all, which they are already talking about is going to cost over $50 trillion. Imagine what's going to happen to the United States economy. That is I don't know, yeah, this it's beyond insane. And point number 7 is that capitalism works in concert with human nature, while socialism works against it. And if you think about it, it's a quote here from Ayn Rand about how America's abundance was created not by public sacrifices to the common good, but by the productive genius of free men who pursued their own personal interests and the making of their own private fortunes. They did not starve the people to pay for America's industrialization. They gave people better jobs, higher wages, and cheaper goods with every new machine they invented, with every scientific discovery or technological advance, and thus the whole country was moving forward and profiting, not suffering every step of the way. And Adam Smith said, "It is not from the benevolence of the butcher, the brewer, or the baker that we expect our dinner, but from their regard to their own interests." A man will work much harder. That's a quote from him. They go on to say here that a man will work much harder to take care of himself, his family, and his friends than he will to make money for the state, which will then waste most of it before they redistribute it to people who aren't working as hard as the man who earned it in the first place. And on that note, I'm going to speak on another thing I heard from Zig Ziglar in one of his books. And what he basically says that you can get anything you want as long as you give enough other people what they want. And that's not how socialism works. And those are just 7 of the many more reasons why socialism will make you poorer than you are under capitalism. But don't be fooled either about capitalism, because what we've been seeing in a lot of countries is that what they're calling capitalism has a heavy dose of socialism put in it. And I think to the extent that countries institute more and more socialist practices and policies, it's going to mess up. I think it's going to shut down the economies. it's going to penalize those economies. It's going to make them worse more and more. It's going to make them more and more. It's going to be more and more detrimental to those societies and to the lives of the people in it. The more socialism you add, and conversely, the more freedom you allow people, the more prosperous the people are going to become, and the nation is going to become. I think the only thing that attracts people in power to socialism is because of the centralized control. If you really think about it, socialism is really a dream come true for people who are statists, people who want to control other people, because that control is there in socialism. And with that said, you have even more food for thought, things to reflect on. And with that, we'll close up, and we're gonna look forward to seeing you on the next episode. And to see that, it'd be great if you would go ahead and subscribe and hit the bell, and go ahead and like this video, and go ahead and comment with your thoughts on what we're talking about here. Thanks.